if you feel afraid, if you feel scared to do what you think God might be calling you to do, or if you feel afraid to just stand up for your faith, if you feel incompetent, if you feel unprepared, if you feel terrified, know that Moses felt all those things too. Last week, we continued looking at the crazy adventures of Abraham and his family. So we talked about Abraham, his son Isaac. We talked about Isaac's son Jacob, the deceiver. We talked about him a lot. Here is the thumbnail. If you missed that one, please go back and check it out. Very interesting. There's so much we can learn from the lives of these people in the Old Testament. We have seen over the past 2 weeks, as we've been going through Genesis, that these men, Abraham and his family, they were very flawed men. They made a lot of mistakes, some pretty big mistakes. But God had made a covenant with Abraham. And his promise to Abraham was that Abraham would have many descendants and that the entire world would be blessed through his family. So even though Abraham and the other people in his family did make a lot of mistakes, they didn't always hold up their end of the deal with God, right? But God always kept his end of his covenant. God was always faithful to the covenant that he had made with Abraham and his whole family. You know, God is always faithful to his promises, even when we're not. And we can see that as we are reading through Genesis in the Old Testament. But God does test us, though. He does test us. And that is what we focused on last week, on how God tests us, why he tests us, so that he does that to strengthen us, to deepen our faith, to make us into the kind of people that he can use to fulfill his purposes, his perfect plans on the earth, to make us into the kind of people who will keep our end of the promises. So that's the reason for the testing. So anyway, we ended last week with Jacob's favorite son, Joseph. So we're going to start with Joseph tonight. Okay, so Joseph is a very different man than his father was, Jacob. Remember, we looked at Jacob. Jacob, he started off as, his name means deceiver, and he was a deceiver. He clawed and scratched his way through life, deceiving people, cheating people, lying. That was Jacob. And as we saw last week, Jacob didn't really seek God or have a relationship, like a direct relationship with God, until he was a lot older. Not until after he physically wrestled with God. We talked about that last week. And so Jacob was kind of forced to have a relationship with God, to acknowledge God. He never willingly submitted or surrendered to God until after this. This was the thing that broke him and changed him after that experience. But his son Joseph, on the other hand, there's AI Joseph right there. His son Joseph seems to have had a relationship with God from the very beginning, from a very young age. He's very, very different from the other men, his predecessors, that we've been looking at so far. Joseph was not selfish. He wasn't deceptive. In fact, throughout the entire story of Joseph, we are never told about Joseph committing a single sin. Not one sin. Except maybe the lack of good judgment that he showed when he was a little boy and he shared his dreams with his brothers and his family about them bowing down to him. That was probably not the wisest thing that he ever did. Still, probably not a sin, just lack of good judgment. So besides that, through his whole life, the Bible never tells us of a single sin. Now, I'm sure he did sin. He wasn't perfect, right? He was human, just like the rest of us. But you may have noticed that the Bible does not hold back in describing the sins of these people, right? The Bible just kind of shares the whole story. So it's very significant that the Bible never tells us of Joseph ever committing a sin. That tells you a lot about the state of his heart and his faith that he had in God. Okay, so you know the story. Joseph's brothers hated him because he was his father Jacob's favorite son. Jacob gave Joseph's preferential treatment. He gave him lots of extra gifts. He had this beautiful coat of many colors made for him. And so because of that preferential treatment, Joseph's brothers grew to hate him. In fact, they grew to hate him so much that they planned to murder him. They were going to kill him. So, but instead they sold him in, they didn't kill him. They sold him into slavery to Egypt. And then they let their father Jacob believe that he had been killed by a wild animal. Very, very sad story. But now notice that it was the oldest brother, Jacob's oldest son, Reuben, is the one brother of all the brothers who fought for Joseph. There were 12 of them altogether. And he did not go along with their plan to murder Joseph. Reuben, the oldest son, is the one who talked the brothers out of it and fought for Joseph's life. So this is really interesting because the only other thing that we really hear about Reuben, the oldest son, was that there's no nice way to say this. Reuben had sex with his father's concubine, Bilhah. Okay. Bilhah was Rachel's handmaid. So we talked about this crazy, crazy family drama. So here's a picture, an artist rendition of Jacob's huge family. Huge, crazy family. So last week we spent a lot of time talking about all the family drama, okay, that was going on with Jacob and his two wives who were sisters, Leah and Rachel, okay? They did not get along very well. And then their two handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah. And so we went through the whole story last week of how when Rachel and Leah went through times where they couldn't get pregnant, they told Jacob to have sex with their handmaids. Okay, so now in this crazy family, you've got four different women, the two sisters, Rachel, Leah, the two handmaids. You've got all four of these women. They all four have children by Jacob. Okay, this is messed up. This is a crazy, crazy family. All kinds of drama going on there. Okay, so to make things even worse, then back to Reuben, the oldest son. So this is Leah's oldest son. Okay, so Reuben sleeps with Bilhah, who is the mother of his two half-brothers, Dan and Naphtali. Okay, are you following me? We probably need to make a chart or something to keep up with all these people. Okay, so this is so messed up. I wonder how Dan and Naphtali felt about their brother, their half-brother, Reuben, sleeping with their mom. Crazy, crazy stuff. And Jacob was obviously not happy about it because he mentioned it on his deathbed. And he cursed Reuben for it. And he gave the firstborn birthright that should have gone to Reuben, gave it to Joseph. Okay. So, Reuben was pretty flawed. He made some very big mistakes, just like pretty much everybody else in this crazy family. So, but now when we get to Joseph, now Reuben is the one brother who defies all the rest of his brothers and fights for Joseph's life. So we find out that Reuben's not all bad, right? He's got good character deep down. And I love this about the Bible. I love it because these stories, they describe real complex human beings. People who they're not all good, bad. They're not all good. They're not all bad. They're a mixture, just like we all are. So these are real human beings. The writers of the Bible, they don't gloss over the mistakes. And they don't try to exaggerate these people and make them into superheroes. They're not cartoon characters. They're real people. And the Bible tells us the raw truth about these people, warts and all. And that's one of the many, many reasons why I think that it makes the Bible even more believable, that you can trust that it is true. All right, so back to the story. So the brothers sell Joseph to some traders who then sell Joseph to in Egypt as a slave. Okay, and they sell him to a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar is the captain of the bodyguard to the Pharaoh, who is the leader of all of Egypt. So Joseph goes from being this pampered, spoiled, favorite son to being a slave in Egypt. So I can't even imagine how difficult this transition would have been for him. But yet we are never told, not one single time, that Joseph complained or that he grumbled or that he was bitter against God or even that he merely sulked a little bit. And remember, the Bible isn't shy about telling the faults of all of these people. Okay. So we never are told about Joseph doing any of those things. Instead, Joseph served Potiphar, his new slave master. He served him diligently, honestly, wisely, shrewdly. And because of that, Potiphar trusted Joseph with everything in his whole household, everything he owned. So, wow. And so you probably know the rest of the story. So Potiphar's wife has a thing for this young, good-looking Joseph. And so she tries to get him to sleep with her. But Joseph was a man of integrity, and he resisted her advances, which made her very mad, because now she is a woman scorned, right? And so anyway, she lies to her husband Potiphar, and she tells him that Joseph had tried to rape her. And unfortunately, Potiphar believes her. He's not a very good judge of character. He believes her, and he throws Joseph in prison. So things now for Joseph have gone from bad to worse, because it was bad enough to be a slave, but now Joseph is in prison for something that he didn't even do. Something he didn't even do. But once again, yet again, we are never told that he grumbled. He didn't complain. He didn't like it, but he still followed God. He excelled in prison, in fact, so much that the warden of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. So he rose up to the top there again. So let's look at what's been happening here, because the Bible tells us over and over and over again throughout this story that the Lord gave Joseph favor. So I want to look at that script, one of those scriptures. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the warden of the prison. And the warden of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison, so that whatever was done there, Joseph was responsible for it. The warden of the prison did not supervise anything under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made whatever Joseph did prosper. Wow. So it's like, no matter what the enemy threw at Joseph, God elevated him to the top. No matter what happened, no matter where he was, Joseph was elevated up to the top, right? Joseph had a deep faith. He had a deep relationship with God. And because of that, God blessed him. Now, you might be thinking, well, if God was showing Joseph all that favor that, like the Bible says, then why did God let Joseph be sold into slavery? Why did God let Joseph be thrown into prison for something he didn't even do? So remember last week when we talked about tests, let me show you that word. Tests. It's hard to say. Well, this was one of them. This was one, in fact, a very, very big, very, very difficult test that God was letting Joseph go through. So Joseph was around 17 years old when he was sold into slavery. And he was a slave in Potiphar's house for 11 years. 11 years. And he was in prison at least 2 years. At least 2 years. So altogether, Joseph was enslaved and imprisoned for 13 years. 13 years. So how could I say that God was showing favor to Joseph? How could I say that? This is so unfair, right? It's so unfair. Joseph didn't do anything wrong. How could God allow this? Well, let me tell you something. Tests aren't fair. Tests are not fair. And here's why. Because if your struggle that you're going through, if whatever bad thing is happening to you, if it's come about because of something you really have done wrong, then it's not a test, is it? It is a justified punishment, right? Do you understand the difference? So what that means is that when God tests you, it's not going to be fair. It's going to feel and seem unfair. Okay, that's part of the test. Part of the test is, how are you going to respond to this unfair situation? Are you going to feel sorry for yourself? Are you going to grumble? Are you going to shake your fist at God? Get bitter, have unforgiveness, blame God? Or are you going to submit to God, to submit to what God has allowed you to go through? Are you going to seek God and be patient and thankful anyway, even though you're going through a very difficult time in your life? Are you going to make the best of it? Are you going to work hard? Are you going to excel no matter where God has put you or allowed you to be? Because that's what Joseph did. So yes, part of the point is it was not fair. Joseph had 13 really, really tough years. I mean, I'm not going to lie. That sounds terrible. They were really, really tough years. But then God arranged, you know the story, right? God arranged for Joseph to be able to interpret the Pharaoh's dream. And then God elevated him to the second highest position in all of Egypt. All of Egypt. God then put Joseph in charge of a whole country. That's how much God blessed Joseph, second only to Pharaoh himself. Now, this happened, this switcheroo, when he became governor of all of Egypt. This happened when he was 30 years old. And then Joseph held that position until he died when he was 110 years old. So get this, Joseph had 13 bad years going through testing, going through trials, going through unfair things, suffering for things he did not do wrong when he didn't do anything wrong. 13 bad years. But then he had 80 amazing years of prosperity, great power. I mean, just unimaginable wealth, right? 80 years, 13 bad years, 80 amazing years. Okay, so I think that in the end, God gave Joseph a pretty good deal. After all, what do you think? What do you think? But here's the thing. If Joseph had not worked hard and excelled at Potiphar's house and when he was in prison, then he would not have been in position to interpret the Pharaoh's dream. If Joseph would have grumbled, if he would have spent his time when he was at Potiphar's house and in prison being angry and bitter against God and sulking, for those 13 years, he never would have been elevated to the governor of all of Egypt. So, and keep in mind that during those 13 years, Joseph had no idea that God was going to turn it around the way he did. For all Joseph knew, he was going to die in prison. He had no idea. And yet he still continued serving God. He still continued, doing excelling to the best of his ability, no matter where he ended up, no matter where God allowed him to go, no matter what the circumstances were, he served God anyway. And so here's the takeaway from all of this, from Joseph's life, is that, all of us go through hard times. We all go through struggles, disappointments. We all go through unfair things. We all go through, if God's using us, if God is training us for anything, then he's going to allow us to be tested. So how are we dealing with those struggles? How are you dealing with your struggles? Do you grumble? Do you get angry? Do you blame God when things get difficult? Do you struggle with bitterness about things like that? Or are you like Joseph? Do you seek God anyway through the troubles? Do you trust God anyway? Because if you will be like Joseph, then and trust God through those difficult times, then God will walk with you through it. And he will bless you in the end. I promise you. I mean, he's probably not going to put you in charge of Egypt, but God will bless you somehow. Because here's why, because there is great blessing in obedience. There is great blessing in trusting God through the hard times. There is great blessing when we have faith in God and seek him anyway, no matter what we're going through, because he fills us up. He reveals himself to us. He gives us internal victory, spiritual victory, and he blesses us in so many ways. So, and if you do that, if we are like Joseph and we seek God and we follow God anyway, no matter what, then not only will your faith grow deeper, but God will use your hardships to strengthen you and train you into the person that he wants you to be. During those 13 years of servitude, God was preparing Joseph to not only save and bless his family, he was preparing Joseph to save and bless all of Egypt. In fact, he was preparing Joseph to save the entire civilized world, because all the people of all the areas surrounding, nations came there to Egypt in order to be fed. So God saved the entire world through Joseph from that terrible famine that lasted 7 years. And that was an enormous responsibility to save the whole world, right? And God used those 13 years of testing to prepare Joseph for that huge assignment. And if God is going to use you, any of us, in some big way, then we will go through testing, okay? It is almost guaranteed, because that is how God trains us. That's how he works. Okay, so before we move on from Joseph, I want to point out one final thing about him. Obviously, Joseph was a really great man of God. He was wise. He was patient. He was brilliant. He was shrewd. He was discerning. He was thankful. He was loyal. He was all of these things. But he was also forgiving. And that's really, really important, Because when Joseph had the opportunity to get revenge on his brothers for the terrible thing that they did to him, he didn't do it. He chose to forgive. Now, he did test them to make sure they had changed, but he still chose to forgive them. And not only forgive them, but to bless them and to take care of them. Joseph took care of his family. His brothers who sold him into slavery, he took care of them for the rest of their lives. Did you know that? All right, let's look at this last scripture about Joseph. Then Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer to me. So this is after the brothers have gone back to Egypt, and Joseph has just revealed to them who he really is. So, of course, they are terrified. They think he's going to probably kill them. And he said, please come closer to me. And they came closer, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold to Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me ahead of you to save lives. For the famine has been in the land for these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. So God sent me ahead of you to ensure for you a remnant on the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his household and ruler over all the land of Egypt. So hurry up and go get my father. Say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay. For you shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. And there I will also provide for you. For there are still 5 years of famine to come, and you and your household and all that you have would be impoverished. So, wow. This is one of the most beautiful stories of forgiveness in the whole Bible. Joseph could have spent those 13 years. He had 13 years to stew about what happened to him, right? 13 years of suffering because of what his brothers did, right? He could have used that time to be bitter, to feed his bitterness and his anger, and to dream about revenge, right? But he didn't do that. Now, a lot of people, that's exactly what they would have done, but he didn't. Instead, he spent that time submitting to God, trusting God, no matter what he was going through. And that's why I love Joseph so much. It's so inspiring, such an inspiring story. So be like Joseph. All right, so that's Joseph. We're going to move on to Moses. So let's move on to my absolutely most favorite person in all of the Old Testament, and that is Moses. Okay, so Jacob's family. So we leave off there at the end of Genesis with Jacob's family and all the brothers moving to Egypt. Okay, and Joseph takes care of them. So the Israelites live in Egypt, in Goshen, for 400 years. 400 years they are in Egypt. And so that brings us to the book of Exodus, which is where we're going now, the book of Exodus, and to Moses. So let's look at the life of Moses. And yes, he is my absolute most favorite character in all of the Old Testament. I love Moses. I'm so excited to be able to look at his life with you. All right. So at this time, there was an evil Pharaoh who had risen to power, and the Israelites now, remember, they were still living in Egypt. And so over those 400 years, the Egyptian Pharaoh had enslaved the Israelites. Okay, so they are now being oppressed. They are being victimized. They are being forced to do difficult back-breaking manual labor. So that is what is happening at the beginning of the book of Exodus. And we find out in the first chapter of Exodus that this evil Pharaoh now has ordered that all the male newborn Israelite babies to be murdered, because the Israelites had grown so much. There were so many of them now that the Pharaoh was afraid that they would be able to overpower the Egyptians, that there were too many of them. So he orders all of the male Israelite babies to be murdered. So it is into this terrible, terrible genocidal situation that Moses is born. So let's look at this story. All right, now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi, and the woman conceived and gave birth to a son. And when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got him a papyrus basket and covered it with tar and pitch. Then she put the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stood at at a distance to find out what would happen to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile. So this is the daughter of that evil, genocidal, murderous Pharaoh. Okay, that's who we're looking at here. She came down to bathe at the Nile with her female attendants walking alongside the Nile. And she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave woman to, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him, and she said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." So the daughter is much different than her father, thank goodness. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a woman for you who is nursing from the Hebrew women, so that she may nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew. And she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses and said, "Because I drew him out of the water." So, wow, this is actually a really incredible story. And I think a lot of times a lot of us who grew up, in church, grew up hearing this story since we were little kids. I think for a lot of us, it's kind of lost its punch because we've heard it too many times. But if you think about what happens in this story, it is an incredible story. Okay, so first of all, if you know, as most of you probably do, the rest of the story of Moses and how he eventually leads the Israelites out of Egypt and through the wilderness, along with his brother Aaron and his sister Miriam, right? Okay, well, this sister here is Miriam. Now, probably most of you knew that, but when I first heard this story when I was growing up, it never clicked with me that, oh, that's Miriam, because they don't say her name here. But that's Miriam, that's his sister. So, wow. So we get to see her here when she's probably a young girl. And what a smart big sister Miriam is here. Isn't this amazing? So Moses, she helps save Moses, but not only that, and of course God is arranging all of this through Miriam, but now Moses's mother is actually going to be able to raise Moses. Not only is he saved, but his mom gets to raise him, and she gets paid to raise him from the Pharaoh's family, the Pharaoh who wanted to kill all the babies. So I love it when God does these turnarounds. It's like boomerang. We talk about that in the prayer group a lot. This is a boomerang, guys. This is awesome. So it's brilliant. And also what is happening here, since Moses's mother, now Moses ends up being able to live in the palace. He is royalty. But since he grows up, since his Hebrew mother raises him, she teaches him his Hebrew identity, teaches him about the Hebrew heritage, right? What a perfect situation. God has arranged the most perfect situation to accomplish his plan with Moses. All right, so Moses grows up. He's a young man. He kills an Egyptian man in anger because the Egyptian man was beating a Hebrew man. Then he ends up running away in fear of his life because the Pharaoh finds out what he did. Okay, because the Pharaoh knew him personally. He's like his grandson, right? So anyway, he runs away. Moses runs away. He settles in a place called Midian, and he marries a Midianite woman, and he has a son. He starts a family. He's just turning out to be a normal guy, right? Not so fast. Then this happens. Okay, so now Moses was pasturing the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, who was the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not being consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside and see this marvelous sight. Why is the bush not burning up? Then the Lord saw that Moses turned aside to look, and God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. And then he said, Do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, Moses, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And God said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So what is happening here? Okay, so this is Moses' encounter with God. Okay, this is probably the first encounter Moses has ever actually had with God at this point. So if you remember, what we've seen so far throughout the Bible is that every single time God reaches out to someone. He meets them in some sort of supernatural encounter, right? Abraham had a vision of a smoking fire pot, blazing torch, plus God met him and spoke directly to him. Jacob sees the ladder of angels, right? Joseph had prophetic dreams. And so this burning bush is Moses' supernatural encounter with God, okay? Very amazing. And now, normally when God encounters somebody like this in the Old Testament, he usually gives them directions, gives them an assignment. Okay, so here is what God tells Moses. The Lord said, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their outcry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. All right, so the Israelites have been oppressed. Obviously, they have cried out to God. God is now responding. So when he says this, Moses is probably like, yay, all right, God, this is awesome. This sounds great. But then God tells Moses his personal directions, and here they are. God says, and now come, and I will send you to Pharaoh so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. So Moses is like, what? Hold on a minute, God. Hold on a minute here, God. Not so fast. Moses is not happy about this part of the directions at all. It's actually terrifying. And so think about this. So Moses is living in Midian because he had run away from Egypt, away from the Pharaoh, because the Pharaoh was going to kill him. Okay, so Moses he's in the wilderness because he's already run away from the Pharaoh in fear of his life. Okay, and now, not only is God saying, go back to Egypt, to this place where you'll be in danger. Not only that, but Moses, I want you to march right up to Pharaoh himself and start bossing him around. I mean, what? What, God? Okay, so here is what Moses said. But Moses said to God, God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? And God said, assuredly, I will be with you, Moses, and this shall be the sign to you that it is I, God, who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Well, thanks a lot, God. That's really a wonderful sign and all, but that doesn't help me when I'm standing in front of Pharaoh, the guy that wants to kill me, telling him what he's supposed to do. So Moses says this. He says, behold, okay, God, I'm going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, what is his name? What shall I tell them, God? Okay, so I think here that Moses is stalling. I think Moses is still in shock, okay, about what God has told him to do. And he's like trying, his brain's probably like, going crazy. What, God? So he's just kind of hem-hawing around trying to figure out something to say, right? Who shall I say sent me? And so here is God's very, very interesting response to this question. And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And God said, this is what you shall say to the sons of Israel. I am has sent me to you. God furthermore said to Moses, this is what you shall say to the sons of Israel. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is the name for all generations to use, to call upon me. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord your God, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and what has been done to you in Egypt. And so God said, I will bring you up out of the oppression of Egypt to a land flowing with milk and honey. All right, so I want to talk about this phrase that God uses here to identify himself for a little bit, because it's very interesting. I am who I am. So that phrase in Hebrew is ehyeh, Asher ehyeh. Okay, that means I am who I am. Okay, so the word, this one single word, ehyeh, it is, get this, okay, it is the first person common singular of the verb to be. How is that for a grammatical designation? I am a former English teacher, so I love this stuff. Anyway, it's a simple way for just saying it means I am. Okay, so it would be used in normal situations like I am watching the sheep. Yeah, watching the sheep. I am walking on the road. Or Luke, I am your father. So, however, when God uses it here the way he does by adding Asher and hey, yeah, when he does it, says it that way, then what it does is it creates this standalone description. It means I am. It becomes the ultimate statement of self-sufficiency. I am, self-existence, immediate presence. God's existence is not contingent upon anybody else. His plans do not depend upon any circumstances. He stands ever present, unchangeable, completely sufficient in himself to do what he wills to do, to accomplish what he wills to accomplish. It means I will be who I will be. It is a mysterious, inscrutable name. It is the name of one who creates and sustains all things. It is who is both in and beyond time and space, who is truth and life and being. I love that. Isn't that amazing? That's what that means. Yeah. Asher, yeah. All right, now I want to show you a little video. So it's a 4-minute video. So those of you who are reading through the Bible with me this year, you know that almost every day we have a Bible Project video, and I hope you're loving these. I love the Bible Project videos. I learned so much. I've read through the Bible cover to cover more times than I can count, and I learned so much from these Bible Project videos. They teach me things, open up the books to me in ways I just could never comprehend before. So anyway, hope you're liking them. But this video I'm going to show you now, it is a Bible Project video, but now I'm actually reading through the Bible a month ahead of you guys because I'm preparing to do this. So this is not a video you have seen yet. This is a video that you're going to see in a month, but I just watched it a couple of days ago and it fits so perfectly with what I'm talking about right now that I wanted to show it to you. So this is a little preview of a video you're going to see in a month. Okay, so it's 4 minutes long. Here it is.
For thousands of years, every morning and evening, Jewish people have prayed these well-known words as a way of expressing their devotion to God. They're called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. We're going to look at the second key word here, Lord, written in all capital letters. This is the personal name of Israel's God. We first learn the meaning of this name in the story of Moses and the burning bush in the book of Exodus chapter 3. God appears to Moses and he commissions him to liberate the Israelites from slavery. And so Moses wonders, what if people ask the name of the God who has sent me? And so God responds, tell them, Ehyeh has sent me to you. Now, that Hebrew word Ehyeh means I will be. In other words, God's name means that he is the one who is and who will be. God's existence doesn't depend on anyone or anything else. This God simply is. But it will sound kind of strange for Moses to go say to the Israelites, I will be has sent me to you. Only God can say, I will be. So in the next sentence, God tells Moses the version he should say aloud. Yahweh, the God of our ancestors, he has sent me to you. Now, that word Yahweh is the ancient Hebrew form of the verb he will be. And this is the personal name of the God of Israel. It appears over 6,500 times in the Old Testament. Now, here's what's interesting. Over the centuries, Israelites wanted to honor the sacred nature of this divine name. So as they read the Hebrew Bible aloud and they came to this name, they stopped saying Yahweh and instead started saying the Hebrew word for Lord, which is Adonai. Now, this practice has been continued throughout the centuries. And so later, when people started translating the Bible into English, they adopted the same practice. Instead of spelling out the divine name, they translated it as Lord, spelled in all capital letters. Okay, you got that? Good, because there's more. Ancient Jewish scribes wanted to prevent anyone from even accidentally saying this name aloud when you read the Hebrew Bible. And so they came up with a visual device to remind you to make sure you say Adonai. They took the 4 consonant letters of the divine name. These letters correspond to our English letters, YHWH. Then they inserted the 3 vowels from the word Adonai and combined these together to create an artificial hybrid word, which if you pronounced it, it would say Yahuwah, but no Israelite ever said Yahuwah. It's simply a visual reminder to say the word Adonai. Now, it gets more interesting. Much later, Christian scribes came along who didn't know that Yahuwah was an artificial word, and so they began to say it aloud and spell it in their writings. This is the word that eventually entered into English as Jehovah. It's a word many people still use today. But the main thing is, the word Lord in all capital letters is an indication of the divine name. Don't confuse it with the word Lord in your English translations that's not in all capital letters. That is the actual Hebrew word Adon, which just means Lord or master. This word can refer to people like kings or the master of a servant, even a shepherd over his sheep. And sometimes biblical authors will use this word to refer to God, like in the phrases, the Lord of all the earth, or the Lord of lords. But behind all of these words, Jehovah, Lord, Adonai, stands the original divine name of the God of Israel. It refers to the one who was, who is, and who forever will be.
There you go. Isn't that cool? I love those videos. So very, very interesting. So God starts off with this cosmic I am statement, okay? And after Moses says, who shall I say is sending me? And then God gives Moses more specific instructions. So let's look at those. Then so this is God talking, he's talking about the Israelites, okay? So he's saying, go to the Israelites, tell them this is my name. Then when you tell them that this is my name, they will pay attention to you, to what you say. And you, with the elders of Israel, will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now, please let us go on a 3 days journey into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. All right. But Moses is not done protesting. He is not done objecting to these scary directions. So here's the next thing he says. Then Moses said, what if they will not believe me? What if they won't listen to what I say? For they may say the Lord has not appeared to you. All right. So he's still protesting. And don't be too hard on Moses. It's easy to say, come on, Moses. This is really, really scary. Think about what God is asking them to do. It's like God telling you, go to this really, really hateful, scary leader of an entire country who wants to kill you and tell him this message. It's a really, really scary thing God's saying. All right. So Moses is still protesting. So God gives Moses a bag of tricks to take along with him, to perform, to show the Israelites that he really has been sent by God. And so I want to park here on these 3 tricks or these signs that God gives Moses for a minute, because I think there's this really interesting message in these tricks. But before we look at these, let me make this point. And I'm sure all of you are aware of this, but it should be very easy to see that the Exodus story, God releasing the Israelites and sending Moses to take the Israelites out of slavery, that this is a story of redemption, right? This is a story of God using Moses to save and deliver the Israelites. So anytime we have a story of redemption and salvation and deliverance in the Old Testament, it is obviously alluding to the Messiah who is going to come in the future, right? So, and I think that we can see in the 3 tricks that God gives Moses here, we can see the story of the ministry of Jesus Christ. Have you ever heard that before? So let me show you what I mean. So let's look at the first little trick that God gives Moses. So here's this one. The Lord said to Moses, what is that in your hand? And Moses said, a staff. And God said, throw it on the ground. So Moses threw it on the ground, and it turned into a serpent, and Moses fled from it. But the Lord said to Moses, reach out with your hand and grasp it by its tail. So Moses reached out with his hand and caught it, and it turned into a staff in his hand. And God said, so they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, have appeared to you. All right. So God tells him, what's that in your hand? It's a staff, throw it down. It turns into this scary snake. Moses runs away from it. God says, go pick it up by the tail. So he does, and it turns back into a staff. All right. So what is the deeper meaning of this first sign, this first trick? So a shepherd's staff is usually used in the Bible to represent God. Okay, God is the great shepherd. He is the one who takes care of us. He protects us, right? So, but then in this story, the staff turns into a snake. So why would this be? So when the great shepherd himself, Jesus, our Messiah, when he came to earth as a man, the very first thing that he did in his ministry was encounter the snake, the devil, in the wilderness, when he went out to be tempted by Satan in the wilderness. This is the very first thing that he did when he started his ministry. And so the snake represents that. And it also represents the evil Pharaoh, because in Egyptian culture, the cobra snake was the main symbol of the Pharaoh's divine authority, right? And it was often part of, like, his headdress would have an image of a snake on it. So here Moses is in the wilderness encountering a snake just like Jesus did. Now Moses, not like Jesus, is obviously afraid of the snake because he runs away from it, right? And then God tells him to do this crazy thing. God says, pick the snake up by its tail. Now what happens when you pick a snake up by the tail? It can flip around and bite you, right? So, but Moses does it anyway. He is obedient, and he picks up the snake by the tail, and then it turns back into his staff. So what is God doing here? So what God is doing here with this first trick, this first sign, it's a sign to Moses too, right? Not just the Israelites. So he's addressing Moses's fear, because Moses is obviously afraid to obey God and to go talk to Pharaoh. That's why he keeps protesting, right? And he's afraid to obey God and go confront the snake, the Pharaoh. And so with this first sign, God is teaching Moses how to take on the snake, how to grab it by its tail and take authority over it, okay? Just like Jesus did to the devil in the wilderness. So that's the first sign. Here's the second one. The Lord furthermore said to Moses, now put your hand inside the fold of your robe. So Moses put his hand inside the fold, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. And then God said, put your hand inside the fold of your robe again. So Moses put his hand inside the fold again, and when he took it out of the fold, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. So God says, if they will not believe you nor pay attention to the evidence of the first sign, they may believe the evidence of the last sign. So Moses puts his hand inside his robe, pulls it out. It is covered with leprosy, puts it back in, pulls it out, and it's completely healed. Wow. So how does this relate to Jesus's ministry? So after Jesus had his encounter with the snake, right, with the devil in the wilderness, the next thing he does is he begins his ministry. Now, what did he do most in his ministry? He heals people, right? Every single place he went, he healed people. He healed every single person who came to him. So when Jesus did that, he was demonstrating his authority over the physical realm, right? So in Egypt at this time, health was like this, good health was like this idolatrous obsession of theirs. They worshiped a lot of gods that had to do with physical health, okay? And skin diseases in particular were considered incurable, and they were considered to be a divine punishment from their gods. So, and also for the Israelites, okay, leprosy was a big thing for the Israelites too. It was this dreaded disease that meant separation from the rest of their people. It represented the defilement of sin, okay? So for God to demonstrate his ability here in this sign to cause and heal leprosy at will instantly, it proves that the superiority of the great I am, the Hebrew God, the one true God, over all the many Egyptian gods, right? And that is also what Jesus was demonstrating when he healed people. All right, so that's the second one. Now let's look at the last sign. But if they will not believe, this is God speaking, if they will not believe even these two signs, nor pay attention to what you say, then you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water which you take from the Nile will turn into blood on the dry ground. All right, so this third sign and the last sign, it has the richest depth of meaning of all the three signs, okay, because it encompasses the entire ministry of Jesus Christ, from Jesus's water baptism at the beginning of his ministry all the way to the shedding of his blood on the cross at the end of his ministry. So for the Egyptians, the Nile River was their source of life, okay? They got their food from it. It watered their crops. They worshiped it as a god, Okay. So for God to turn the water of the Nile River into blood, this strikes at the very heart of all Egyptian life. Okay. Their culture, their survival, their entire faith structure, their religion. So it confirmed the absolute power and control of the Hebrew God over Egyptian religion. Does that make sense? So anyway, that's the 3 signs. I think that this is so fascinating. And I also, here's another theory that I have. I think that at this point, when God is giving Moses these signs, I think God is starting to get a little perturbed at Moses. Do you feel that? Because Moses continues to refuse. Okay. He continues to protest and say, no, I don't want to do that, God. So God gives Moses this little bag of parlor tricks, right? God knows that as you read the story, okay, when Moses uses these tricks in front of the Pharaoh's magicians are able to do all these same tricks. They use demonic trickery, and they can do all 3 of these signs, okay? God knows that's going to happen. God knows that none of these 3 signs is going to make one bit of difference for Pharaoh when Moses demonstrates these signs for the Pharaoh. God knows that. God knows that. And yet he gives these signs to Moses anyway. So I really think that God is growing a little bit weary of Moses, his protesting at this point. I think he's toying a little bit with Moses because I think his point is that, you know what, Moses, you really should just trust me, believe me, obey me. I am the I am, right? Instead of arguing with me here, just do what I say. You really shouldn't need this little bag of parlor tricks. So I think this is the whole point. But Moses is not done yet. Okay, here's what Moses says next. Then Moses said to the Lord, please, Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither recently nor in time past, nor since you've spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. But the Lord said to him, this is funny. Who has made the human mouth, Moses? Who makes anyone unable to speak or deaf or able to see or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now then go, and I myself will be with your mouth, and I will instruct you what you are to say. Can you sense God's frustration with Moses at this point? I think it's clear at this point. I think it's clear that God's getting a little tired of all of this. I love it when he says, I will be with your mouth. That's hilarious. Remember, at this point, Moses is still standing in front of this burning bush that is not being consumed by the fire. So there is a literal miracle happening right in front of Moses' face at this point, right? And Moses still cannot just trust God to know what God is doing here. You know, he is still protesting. He's still too afraid. He still is refusing to obey. And this is the last thing that Moses says here. He says, please, Lord, now just send the message by whomever you will. At this point, Moses, he's just like saying, no, don't send me, God. No, send somebody else. Send somebody else. And now he's done it. Now he's done it. Then the anger of the Lord burned against Moses. And he said, he started with a sigh. That's what I believe. He said, is there not your brother Aaron the Levite? I know that he speaks fluently, and moreover, behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be overjoyed. So you are to speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I myself will be with your mouth and with his mouth. So funny. And I will instruct you in what you are to do. And Aaron shall speak for you to the people, and he will be as a mouth for you, Moses, and you will be as God to him. And you shall take in your hand the staff with which you shall perform the signs. God was mad. But notice how extremely patient God is being with Moses here. You know, I mean, he could have just consumed him by the fiery bush in 1 second. But God is bending over backwards to work with Moses here by allowing Aaron to come and speak for him. And then God predicts this very shocking thing that I actually don't remember noticing before. God says this, and the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders which I put in your power, all this little bag of tricks, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I said to you, let my son go so that he may serve me, but you have refused to let him go. Behold, I am going to kill your son, your firstborn. Do you remember this? Because when I read this year, I don't remember reading that God told Moses the whole game plan before he even went to Egypt. So God actually tells Moses exactly what is going to happen. Okay, there should not be any surprises for Moses. Okay, he tells him, you're going to do this. Moses, the Pharaoh is going to say no. He is not going to listen. And then God identifies which plague, the last plague, the 10th one, the one when the firstborn sons die. That's the one that's going to get Pharaoh to relent. God is preparing Moses for exactly what's going to happen. All right, so finally, after this, Moses decides, okay, God, I'm not happy about it, but I will obey you. So Moses stops arguing at this point and just prepares to do what God has told him to do. So he goes back, he gets his wife and his son, and they get ready to travel to Egypt. All right. Do you want to talk about this weird story with Zipporah, Moses' wife, when she circumcises their son? Shall we go there? Yes, of course. Let's talk about this weird story. Okay, so Zipporah is Moses' wife. And here's this little story. All right, so it came about at the overnight encampment on the way. Okay, so Moses, his wife Zipporah, their son, they are traveling back to Egypt from Midian. Okay, that the Lord met Moses and sought to put him to death. So Zipporah, Moses' wife, took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin, ouch, and threw it at Moses' feet. And she said, you are indeed a groom of blood to me. And so God left Moses alone. At that time, Zipporah said, you are a groom of blood because of the circumcision. Okay, so what? What is this crazy story? So it is really a weird story. Yeah, very weird. But there's actually a very simple meaning to it, very simple explanation. So here it is. So Moses was Hebrew, okay? And so as a Hebrew, Moses should have circumcised his son because God had commanded all the Hebrew men to circumcise their sons. That was a very important commandment, something that separated the Hebrews from all the other people. But for some reason, Moses had not done this. Maybe it was because he was living with non-Hebrews. Maybe he got lazy. His wife wasn't Hebrew. For whatever reason, we don't know. Moses had neglected this very important commandment from God. And so now that Moses has finally agreed to obey God and he is going into the service of the Lord, he needs to take care of this. He needs to purify himself and he needs to circumcise his son. All right, so many historians believe that Moses had become sick and bedridden, okay, because of this. And that's what it means that the Lord met Moses and sought to put him to death. So he had struck Moses with some sort of sickness, okay? And Zipporah now somehow understands what needs to happen in order to take care of the situation. And she has to do it because Moses is too sick and too bedridden. Now, this is just what some historians surmise from this. It's not written in here. Okay, and what I think is that I agree with this. I think Moses was sick. Moses understood exactly what was happening. God had come to him to kill him because he had been disobedient. And so Moses knows exactly what needs to happen, and he tells Zipporah what to do. That's what I think happens. Okay, so that's why she does this. Maybe she didn't want to do it. It was a weird thing for her. Who knows? Maybe that's why she throws the foreskin at him. Here you go, And that's why she says, you are a groom of blood to me. I don't know what she would have thought about this weird Hebrew custom. But Zipporah saved his life when she did that. So that's that weird story. Okay, so let's go back to Egypt. So Moses gets better. He continues his journey back to Egypt. He meets his brother, Aaron, and then they confront the Pharaoh and start telling him what to do. Let God's people go. All right, and so you probably know the story. So they tell the Pharaoh this. The Pharaoh says, no way, Jose. And then the Pharaoh responds by making the Israelites work even harder. And so then all the Israelites get mad at Moses. When Moses had first come to them, they said, oh, yay, this sounds great. He showed them the tricks. They're like, yeah. Then things get harder. And then they get mad. They get mad at Moses. Why are you doing this to us? So, but now Moses is obeying the Lord. Okay. He's finally decided to stop protesting and obey the Lord. And we are even told that as the Lord commanded them, so they did, Moses and Aaron. So then after Moses and Aaron tell the Pharaoh this, Pharaoh says, no way. Then God starts striking Egypt with plagues. These are divine disasters that were intended to convince the Pharaoh to release the Israelites and let them go worship their God. But, however, God knew that the Pharaoh was going to say no. He had already told Moses that this was going to happen. So he knew Pharaoh was going to harden his heart and refuse to obey during the first 9 plagues, right? So in fact, after the first 5 plagues, okay, so if you're reading along, if you're reading through the Bible with me and with the group of us this year, and you're watching the videos narrators mentioned this a couple of times, that the first 5 plagues, we are told in the Bible that Pharaoh hardened his heart. So Pharaoh chose out of his own free will to ignore what God was commanding. Okay. But then by the 6th plague and then the rest of the plagues, it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Okay. So Pharaoh started the process and then God finished it for him. And why did he do that? And God says right here, God tells Moses, I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that I may multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. And he did. And now we're reading about them today. So these signs and wonders are still known about today. That's how big this was, what happened in Egypt during this event. God had a plan, and God knew exactly what was going to happen, and God was always in control. Okay. Now I want to end tonight by talking about these plagues because there's something really cool about them that I want to show you. Okay. So altogether there were 10 plagues that God brought upon the Egyptians. And after each one, normally what would happen, it would be this, Moses would come and say, this is let God's people go, Moses, or Pharaoh would say no. And then Moses would say, okay, this is going to happen. The plague would happen. It would be terrible. And then the Pharaoh would call Moses back and say, please, Moses, pray to your God to stop this plague. And I promise I will let the Israelites go. Moses would go pray. God would stop the plague. And then Pharaoh would renege on his promise. And he would not let the people go. So this happened over and over and over again. Pharaoh's heart keeps getting harder and harder and harder until finally his own people, the Egyptians, are begging Pharaoh, please let them go. Just let them go before all of Egypt is completely destroyed. So there's something really interesting about the plagues that I want to talk about. So each plague is God's direct challenge to a specific Egyptian deity, okay? A specific, one of the gods of the Egyptians. So I want to look at those really quickly because it's just so interesting. All right, so let's go through the 10 plagues. So the first one is when the Nile River turned to blood. And so we're told that the whole Nile was full of blood. Remember, that's their source of life. So all the fish died. It stank. They could not drink the water. It was terrible. So this was a direct challenge against the Egyptian god of Hapi. Okay, this was the god of the Nile. Okay, plague number 2 is the frogs. And so we're told that there were frogs everywhere. They were all over every person. They were in their houses. We're told they were actually in their ovens and in their kneading bowls, right? Where they made the bread. Ugh, that was really gross. So there were frogs everywhere. Okay, and so this was a direct challenge to the Egyptian god Heket, who was the goddess of fertility. And you can see Heket right there, and she has the head of a frog. Okay, plague number 3. And this was the gnats, okay? And there were gnats, or these little insects, all over the place. They were swarming around on every person. They were on every animal, driving everybody crazy. If you've ever been in a swarm of gnats, you know it drives you insane. And so that was a direct challenge to 2 different gods. To this guy, Geb, and he was the earth god, and there he is with a bird on his head. And this Egyptian god, Set. Okay, and he was the god of storms. And this guy looks really cool, doesn't he? I like him. I don't like him. Okay, I don't mean that. Okay, he was an Egyptian god, probably a demon. I like the way he looks, though. It's interesting. nobody's sure what kind of animal his head is, an animal head, maybe an aardvark or some kind of a dog, or maybe even a giraffe, or some of the guesses that people have made, but they aren't sure what kind of animal that is. But that's the god of storms and of violence and of disorder. His name is Set. Okay, so plague number 4, the flies. Okay, so there were thick swarms of flies everywhere, all over Egypt. It says because of the flies, the land was laid waste. Okay, so this is a challenge against the Egyptian god Khepri, who was the beetle god. And you can see this weird-looking Egyptian god. His head was like a scarab beetle. So very interesting. All right, plague number 5. This is when the livestock died. And so at this point now, God had separated the Egyptians from the Israelites who lived in the land of Goshen. So the first 3 plagues, it appears that the Egyptians and the Israelites were affected by those first 3 plagues. But then God starts separating them. So when the livestock died, all of the Egyptians' livestock died, but not the Israelites. Okay, so there was separation. And this was a challenge against the Greek god, or the Egyptian god, Hathor, who was the cow goddess. And there is the cow goddess right there. She's got a sun on top of her head. Plague number 6. Okay, these are the boils. Ugh. So these were open sores on every person and every animal. I guess there were some animals left after the livestock died. Maybe they went and took the Israelites' animals. I don't know. But anyway, the poor animals are really getting a bad deal because the Pharaoh is has a hard heart. So yeah, open sores on every person, every animal. This was a direct challenge to 2 different gods. You may have heard of this one, Isis, who was the healing goddess. There she is. And Sekhmet, who is the goddess of disease and plagues. So she's interesting. She has a head of a lion. All right, plague number 7, hail. And we're told hail and fire. Hail and fire. It struck everything. It broke everything, shattered every single tree in Egypt, we are told. This was a challenge against the sky goddess Nut. Okay, and there she is with a water pot on her head. Okay, plague number 8, the locusts. Okay, so at this point, the locust came, covered every surface. They ate everything. They destroyed everything that was left in Egypt at this point. After the locust came, there was nothing green left in all of Egypt. So this was a direct attack against this guy here, Osiris, who was the god of crops. Okay, he was one of the biggest gods of the Egyptian religion. Okay, number 9, darkness. So we're told that the darkness that hit Egypt was so dense that it could be felt. Isn't that weird? Can you imagine? It could be felt. And so this was an attack, a challenge to the Egyptian god Re, who was the sun god. And there he is. And he looks really cool. He's got the head of a falcon and a sun on his head. So that is Re. Okay, and so now we're down to the very last one, the one that made all the difference. And it is when the firstborn sons die. And so this last plague was a challenge against the divinity of the Pharaoh himself. Because in Egypt, in Egyptian religion, the Pharaoh and the Pharaoh's firstborn sons were considered to be gods. Okay, so for God to come in and kill those firstborn sons was a challenge against the divinity of Pharaoh himself. So wow. So God had repeatedly stated throughout all of this that the plagues were intended to show both the Egyptians and the Israelites so that they would know, I am the Lord, is what God said. I am, right? That is the reason for these plagues, to demonstrate the authority and the sovereignty of the true Hebrew God. And so by targeting specific Egyptian gods, the true God was asserting his authority and superiority and his total control over nature, over life, over death. And these were all things that the Egyptians thought that their gods were in charge of. Okay, so it was a power message of God's sovereignty, not just to the Israelites, but to the Egyptians, to all the world. Because again, we're still reading about it today, thousands of years later. So I want to sum up by considering what the Israelites went through during all of this, because the Israelites were, they were enslaved. They were doing hard labor. Okay, their lives were really hard before Moses came. But then when Moses shows up, the Pharaoh makes their lives even harder. They're supposed to make bricks, make this quota of bricks every day. And then after Moses shows up, the Pharaoh says, don't give them any straw anymore. They have to go find their own straw to make their bricks, but they have to still make the same number of bricks that they were making before. It's just unreasonable. He's making their lives so much harder. So think about this. They were tormented by all of this extra hard work. They had to endure the first 3 plagues, which were the blood, the frogs, the gnats. And then they were shielded from the rest of the plagues, but they still were enslaved, right? So, and according to Jewish tradition, those 10 plagues in Egypt lasted from 10 to 12 months. So almost a whole year they had to go through this, right? Waiting for God to do what he said he was going to do. So what I want you to notice is that the Israelites were getting ready to be freed from slavery. They were getting ready to have something amazing happen to them, right? Freedom, freedom in this miraculous way. But in the short term, their lives got harder, like a lot harder, right? Just like what happened to Joseph. Joseph had 80 years of, amazingness, but he went through 13 really, really hard years right before that happened, So last week I talked about tests and how the Bible shows us that God does indeed test us in order to sanctify us, in order to make us who he wants us to be. So the takeaway from this is that remember, when you go through difficult times, God is not mad at you. Okay, he might be testing you. So hang on to him through it. He's got a plan. He always does. He will walk through it with you if you let him. And if you seek him through the hardships, then he can turn it around and do something really good. And the very last thing I want to talk about tonight is to consider Moses. Okay, Moses is, I say, inarguably the most important man in the entire Old Testament, right? God used Moses to accomplish his will more powerfully than anybody else in history except Jesus, right? Moses was God's friend. God spoke to Moses face to face. There has never been anybody like Moses. There never will be. Moses was a one of a kind. But notice how Moses began his ministry. Notice what happened to him, the way he responded when God first encountered him. Moses was 80 years old, by the way. When he saw the burning bush, Moses was 80. Wow. So here's how Moses acted when God first encountered him and first gave him his assignment. Moses was afraid. He was unwilling. He was uncertain. He was a stuttering, protesting fool. That's who Moses was. But then God transformed Moses into one of the greatest men who ever lived. And so here's what we learn from this about Moses' life. If you feel afraid, if you feel scared to do what you think God might be calling you to do, or if you feel afraid to just stand up for your faith, if you feel incompetent, if you feel unprepared, if you feel terrified, know that Moses felt all those things too. Moses felt all those same ways. God can use anybody. God can use you. God can transform you into a mighty warrior for God. There's only one thing, one difference between who Moses was at the beginning, that stuttering, protesting fool, and this great man, mighty man of God that Moses was at the end. One thing, one difference, and that is obedience. Obedience. His commitment to obeying God allowed God to transform him into this mighty man of God. And this is true for every single one of us. And so the question is, are you willing to obey God? Are you willing to submit to God and whatever his plan is, no matter what he asks you to do? Because that is the key to being used of God, to being transformed by God, to become a mighty person of God. Obedience. All right, guys, that is all I have for you tonight. Let me pray and then hang up for the evening. All right, Lord Jesus, we worship you and we praise your holy name, and we thank you so much for your Bible, Lord. Thank you for your love letter that you have taken the time to put together for us so that we can learn about you. Lord, it is a treasure. Lord, may we treasure it. Lord, open up our eyes and our minds and our souls to spirits to understand more deeply the words that are in your book, Lord. Lord, just thank you so much for your love for us, for your relationship that you desire to have with us, Lord God. We thank you for Jesus, for your sacrifice, so that we can have a relationship with you, that we can have eternal life and spend eternity with you, Lord Jesus. Lord, I pray for every single person watching this right now. Pray, Lord God, that you would meet their needs, that you would reach out to them, embrace them with your love. Lord God, I pray that you would put within each one of us a deeper desire for you, to get closer to you, and a hunger for you, Lord. In your holy name I pray, Jesus. Amen. Thank you so much for watching Join Hands with Heaven. I'm BlueTapp. If you have gotten anything at all from this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, like and share this video. That really helps get this content out to more people. And please leave some comments. I'd really love to hear from you and get to know you better. If you're interested in keeping up with me and my writings, please sign up for my free email list by texting BLUE, B-L-U-E, to 33777. And we'll get you all connected. God bless you richly, and I love you with the love of Christ. Read My Demon, My Jesus, Blue's memoir about her suicide, out-of-body death experience, and her miraculous healing. Companion workbook, Chaos Calmed, is a guide to Christian meditative prayer and spiritual healing. Join Hands with Heaven, 6 prophetic visions, 1 event, 1 message. All 3 books available on Amazon.com.